Good afternoon and welcome everyone to today's panel discussion on water. It's always exciting to me when I've assembled such a group of talent with diverse practices, backgrounds, and experiences to talk about something so fundamental to all of us. None of us can survive without water, and yet we're in an area that, notwithstanding the incredible amount of rain we've had this year, we are still struggling. We have very little rainfall. We don't do as much as we should to preserve it, to capture it, to reuse it, to recycle it. And the people on this stage today are all incredible innovators in their respective areas with this problem. And together, I'm confident they can solve all the problems of the world. That's not even an overstatement. All right. So on my very far right is my good friend, BJ Kjaer. He is the founder and owner of Solar Rain Watery, which is America's only desalinated ocean water, bottled water, which is 100% solar power. He says 83, but last I heard was 87% efficiency. And what is brilliant about his product, there's absolutely zero waste product. There's no return of the salty brine to the ocean. In fact, then what he does is use the same solar power to dehydrate that salty brine to make sea salt, which he sells to restaurants. Like, this is a brilliant solution to the one source of water we know that isn't shrinking, but in fact rising. So we could potentially kill two birds, one stone. And he also, that water is in biodegradable, recyclable containers. He can tell you more about it, but thank you, BJ, for being here with us. Always my privilege. On my immediate right is Sarah Livia Brightwood Szekely. She's the executive president of Rancho La Puerta. She is also the owner of Tres Estrellas, which is an organic garden in Tecate, not too far from here, which feeds the lucky guests of Rancho La Puerta with incredible food. And Rancho La Puerta was founded by her parents 83 years ago this week, which I think is incredible, really, truly. She is also the president of Fundación La Puerta, an organization focused in Tecate on sustainability. And her project that she's here to talk about today is the project that she started, which is a water treatment project at Tres Estrellas, which is passive, biological, net zero energy, and no waste. And she's going to tell you more about that in case you don't know what any of that means. You are not alone, and she'll explain it to you. On my left is Dr. Juana Claudia Leyva Aguilera, but Claudia, see? Yeah. Claudia. She's a biologist with the National School of Biological Sciences, IPN. She has a master's in ecosystem management, a doctorate in environment and development from UABC, and she's currently overseeing a project regarding participatory management of a community aquifer, which is called Observatorio Guadalupe. And we're going to hear about the work that she's doing right here in this community. Next, we have Luis Salgado. He has a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Hydrology and Water Resources from the University of Arizona. He is the Green Infrastructure Project Manager at Watershed Management Group in Tucson, Arizona. He's also, as I discovered, a member of the Arizona-Sonora Border Region Water Task Force. And he's focused on community-centric ecological approaches to education or educating the public about environmental issues and natural resource conservation, namely water. But not just water, but today we'll talk about water. And finally, last but not least, we have Alejandro Carrillo, who is a fourth-generation Chihuahuan rancher. He utilizes holistic land management practices to increase the yield. He's been featured in several documentaries, including Common Ground, which is just right today, premiering at the Tribeca Film Festival in New York, and he will be going straight there tomorrow to join in the festivities. So felicidades. And let's say he's a little bit of a magician, and I think everyone on the panel is. He has managed to increase the rainfall in his land and other land doing similar holistic land management practices by 10% by using mixed herd rational grazing. And I love that. When I asked him if he did rotational grazing, he said, no. I call it rational grazing. So actually, let's start with you. Let's talk a little bit about what you do, Alejandro. Tell me about the work you do.
And thanks for the opportunity to share some of the things that we do at the ranch. So actually, it was because we needed to make a change. A lot of the land has been desertified. And actually, unprofitable business. We say that in order to have a cattle ranch and sustainable cattle ranch, it needs to be profitable as well.
It's one of the parts of sustainability that people often don't think about, because if you can't maintain it, how are you going to continue that action? So I'm glad to hear you say that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we cannot actually rely on the government help us or things like that. So that actually make us do the change into a more regen, holistic, rational grazing.
What do you mean by rational grazing?
Well, we say rational because it's a thinking process. I mean, there are some signs of what we do, but also there's a lot of thinking. Because remember, it's quite complicated to deal with nature. There's many variables. Sometimes ranchers tell me, oh, I'm about the same as 10 years ago. I don't think so. I mean, we are actually improving or we are actually degrading the land. So we try to get into that virtuous cycle of improving the land, improving the soil, improving the diversity, improving the wildlife, capturing more water, lowering the...
What does improving the soil have to do with increasing water or availability of water?
Yeah, the conventional knowledge of farmers and ranchers is that if we till the soil, then we will actually be able to capture more water. It's exactly the opposite.
Exactly. So explain that, because that is definitely a prevailing viewpoint, this old methodology of till, but what does that do? Releases carbon, dries up the soil. So tell us why.
Yeah, and it does actually compact the soil. So as we explained earlier today, the major limitation on productivity in farmland and rangeland is not actually water, is air in the soil. So as we feed the microbiology in the soil, specifically the mycorrhiza of fungi, that fungi actually creates the aggregate, so the space in the soil, which will allow us to actually infiltrate more water. Think about for a moment, in the state of Chihuahua, we did a study, we're only filtrating 40% of the water. So we asked the rancher, don't tell me how much rain you get, how much water you can infiltrate and keep for the plant.
And you mean by that 60% that's hitting and just running off, which we all experience in some of the drier climates. But when you talk about infiltrating, you mean water that is literally captured and stored and preserved in the soil. And how do you do that?
Exactly. We are trying to mimic nature. I mean, some people ask me, what do you do? What do you do, Alejandro? I'm just mimicking nature. So in nature, you actually always cover the soil. You have diversity, not a monoculture. You have living roots. And then one of the most important tasks that we do is to fix the water cycle. What is a normal water cycle is when it rains, it infiltrates. And then it's taken by the plants and it evapotranspirates. When it does evapotranspirate, it's living water. It's not just like dead water, like evaporation. And that goes with aerial bacteria into the sky, to the clouds, and then it actually promotes, again, more rain. That's what we're trying to do by mimicking nature. And when we say mimicking nature, in northern Mexico, we have these big herds of bison making animal impact with all the tools that the livestock does, like the hoof impact, the saliva, the rain, the manure, and then we give it a rest. And that's the way we start awakening the dormant seed that is waiting for the right conditions to germinate.
Which is how you've managed to increase the growth of grasses and herbs on the soil that we're talking about.
Exactly.
It's interesting. Someone I know Ray Archuleta, who was in the film Kiss the Ground. If you haven't seen it, little plug, it's on Netflix. But the Common Ground, the film that he's featured in, is the follow-up by the same filmmakers. But one of the parts of the film that really stuck to me is he used to teach at the USDA schools and so forth. And he said that farmers learn that soil is simply a growing medium, that it's not alive. And yet we know that there are more microorganisms in one tiny handful of healthy soil than there are or ever will be human beings on the planet. And the difference between dead dirt and alive, healthy soil is not just for the plants, but also increasing the growth and also, as you say, bringing more water and rain and moisture to the region. And how? Tell me how.
Yeah, it is. We need green plants. Why do we need? I mean, when we started working at the ranch, we only have green grass on the 3 months that we got the rain, the monsoon. Now, because we are now able to infiltrate more water thanks to the photosynthesis, because you need the photosynthesis to feed the microbiology. If you stop getting these green plants, then you're gonna reduce the populations, and then it's all gonna get compacted again. So that actually is what helps us to feed the microbiology around the year, and then to keep the water where the plant can use it. Because remember, we have our bacteria in our tummies, in our stomachs that help us digest. The plants depend on the microbiology. So they have a symbiotic relationship, and they need each other.
One of the things, I know you're a cattle rancher and that's your primary business, but as I know you've said before, is that you don't just graze cattle. You have a mixed herd. And why is that?
Yeah, you keep evolving on your management, trying to get as close as possible to nature. So in nature, you don't really have only deer, or you don't only have like all kind of these different grazers, big horns and things. So why are we actually using only cattle? That really is not, it's a monoculture of grazers.
Exactly.
So
same concept.
So we're integrating donkeys, sheep, goats in a big herd. Horses.
Okay, so now I'm going to move to you, Luis, a little bit. My panel hasn't gotten rolling yet. We'll get them going. But I want you to talk to us a little bit about what you do with watershed management. What does that mean exactly? What do you do at your organization and you personally? What moves you?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to, that resonates a lot with me in terms of what I do with the work that I do with watershed and personally of mimicking the natural cycle, right? Reintroducing the hydrologic cycle back into our built environments, our urban environments, through, implementing green infrastructure, making better use of the water that we get that would just otherwise run off and who knows where it ends up, right? Evapotranspirated or ponded.
So you're talking capture.
Capture, right.
And then we've heard there's active and passive capture. What does that mean?
So active is kind of like maybe what most people are familiar with. Active are those tanks, what are these called? The gutters, all those systems that you collect from your roof, put it in a tank, and then use that water for when you need it, right? I think one thing that goes along with active systems is that, it's very, relatively simple to kind of install these systems at somebody's home, someone's property, but what is the education behind how to use this water that we're now storing, right? Very much taking into context where you're at, the types of rainy seasons that you get and what you're trying to grow, right? What's going to survive in your environment. So that's very much kind of like a very reduced summary of active systems. Passive systems, what I'm really passionate about is shaping the earth to collect the water and, infiltrating it, putting it back into the ground again. Like you mentioned, more, I think, I forget the stats correctly, but 70 to 80% of our water is now running off instead of going back into our aquifers where before where we didn't have all these impermeable surfaces, most of that water was going back into the ground. So that's kind of that's kind of my mission in a lot of what I do. And kind of to your point of kind of different new ways, a rational way of rational grazing. Taking the time to observe your landscape, observe the nature, how things are working in your backyard, in your community, in your neighborhood, instead of getting into action right away, right? So it's long and thoughtful observation and looking at what's happening and knowing how to read the land so you can better make use of your resources and things that are falling right up on your head, right? One thing that I really like to say is don't just do something, stand there, right? Because you might as well just take the time and then try to streamline everything and then kind of go back and try to fix your processes. Let's get a holistic view, an integrated approach to these systems that we're deciding to bring back these systems into our cities. Yeah.
You said something earlier that I really liked during the introduction, which was, we tend to think of urban environments and rural environments as these two things as being completely different, and they may be, but there's no reason why we can't and clearly should bring more of the rural, alive environment into the urban environment. If we're going to continue to live in an urban environment, it's probably necessary. Will you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, again, mimicking nature, right? My idea is that nature is not out there, or nature is not way out there. I'm going to go hike this place.
That's one day a week. I'm going to go to nature and then come back.
Exactly. Let's make that part of our way of living, our lifestyles, right? Our sustainable livelihoods. We can bring the spaces here and sort of bring that big nature back into the city, right? It makes me happier to go out and be able to walk under some trees, under some shade, knowing that the water that these trees are using are water that would otherwise just kind of like run off and cause problems to somebody. Now it's as a beneficial resource for these plants, for all the different communities that take part of our lives, right? Not just human, but like all different organisms that exist in the soil and the air and the trees, the animals, all of that stuff.
It's very symbiotic if we'll just sort of slow down and accept.
Yeah, the idea of like ecological relationships, right? Forming
It's
those
integrated, interrelated.
exactly. So like not just human centric, but life centric.
Yeah, very important. Very important. Claudia, is there anything you want to add before I go ask a question of my neighbor on the right?
Well, for my formation in academic formation, I like biologist. But in this project, academic comes to the community.
Of course.
The Observatorio Participativo Guadalupe is the opportunity to the information, the academic information, using for the people. In this case, worked in a lot about the water, because the water is the point for this finish.
Of course. And I think I was listening to what you said before, and the critical thing, I think, and the magic of where academia can really, really be impactful in communities is not coming in and saying, we know how to solve your problems, but coming in and saying, what are your problems? Tell me about them. Is there any way in which we might be able to help? And I think that's beautiful what you're doing here, which is a real conversation with the community about the problems and then utilizing all of the resources to try to address them.
Yes, the most important is interchange of the knowledge, because the people make many things for the using the water for example. And the academic using this information, but there are not communication.
There's a disconnect.
Yeah, disconnect. Yes. But at the Observatorio Participativo is the link for this information.
The community with academia.
Academic, and had a more the decision making takes the information, the correct information for take the exact decision.
How to take action based on the community's needs, the community's activities, and how the resources that are available here at the university setting can come into play and really make a positive impact. This is big for you too. You're all about education. That's a big part of your Watershed Management Group.
Yeah, it's being able to provide the people with the knowledge, right, and the resources to do things. I don't want to say the right way, but maybe the most appropriate to their context, right? Something that might work for this person or this place over here might not be the best scenario approach to have here. So informing on how to people can be familiar with the tanks and the water harvesting, but what's the use? What is it that the application of it?
Now, let me talk about what you're doing over at the ranch in Tecate. You've been there a long time. You were born there, weren't you?
I was actually born in San Diego, but I've been at the ranch since I was 3 days old.
They're close enough. Amazing.
My parents arrived in 1940, and I've been witness to this incredible evolution of both a business, a sanctuary, a wellness retreat, and an innovative program that has now been copied by thousands and thousands of places.
It's the most sincere form of flattery, imitation. So that means you're doing something very right.
But I would say that my focus has been ecological since I was a teenager. And my studies in school allowed me also to focus on education for our community. So Fundación La Puerta, the nonprofit arm of Rancho La Puerta, has been the leader in environmental education in Northern Baja now for 30 years. And just Monday was the International Day for the Environment, El Día Mundial del Medio Ambiente. And we had 1,000 sixth graders there going through a variety of stations that were a combination of games and education. And then we had the science fair projects, and they were focused on plastics, microplastics, trash, and the 3 R's: recycle, reduce, and reuse. And it was amazing to see how this generation has really taken on the challenge And I think the beauty of being somewhere for 83 years is that we can see multiple generations move the dialogue forward. And the children that we had 20 years ago in our environmental education program are now in positions of influence. They're teachers themselves. And that's a tremendously gratifying thing to see.
Well, yeah, and the work that you've been doing there on many, many fronts is extraordinary. And I, of course, know of the garden at Tres Estrellas, which is amazing. And the current project that you have there is in sort of cleaning up water in that area. You want to tell us a little bit about what you've done to try to address an issue where you are? A new issue, really.
So as a farmer, we had really good well, very high quality water. And as the water table of the aquifer has been contaminated by industry in the city and by a very obsolete and poorly maintained water treatment plant, so that 50% of Tecate's wastewater goes directly into the river, and that's impacting our aquifer.
And you said when you were a girl, you swam in the river, drank the water from the river without any treatment. And that is the reality of today, that it's very hard to find a river anywhere that is clean enough to drink right out of the cup, no?
You know, wild water, drinking wild water is something that we've lost, just like most of us have lost the night skies. I think it's like part of our inheritance as human beings that we should have these experiences of drinking water straight from a stream or a spring, a high mountain stream. And so a lot of what I do comes out of the idea that you evaluate your actions looking ahead 7 generations.
Yeah.
Now, we've had a chance to do it for 3 generations at Rancho La Puerta. But with the contamination of our wells, with beginning to see the degradation of the water table, we had kind of a double challenge. One was how to generate cleaner, better water for irrigation. And the other...
Because it mattered to you. You said that earlier. It matters to you, the water that you use in irrigating the plants. Explain that.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, anybody who farms or who grows plants knows that if you're using water that has high salinity, the ground becomes hydrophobic. The plants can't uptake the water. You can water them all you want, but they're not going to do well. As soon as you have a rain and it washes the salts out of the ground, the plants shoot up magnificently. And heavy metals accumulate in the soil. And the living organisms cannot handle all of the contaminants that we're putting into our soils. So yes, production really suffers. And the quality of the food, the nutrition.
The mineral content alone, right?
Yeah, one of the beauties in our area, because it's a granitic landscape, is very high, rich mineral soils. And my father felt that was essential for human health. He would say you cannot raise a strong people on degraded soils, on weak soils. So
it's been true since the dawn of time.
So there was an abundance of sewage and an issue with the contamination of the watershed and our aquifer. And we also needed water for irrigation. So I was lucky enough to meet a Belgian man who had developed a variety of biological treatment plants in different parts of Mexico. His name is Eric van der Abenmüller. And he has an amazing repertoire of challenges that he has dealt with, from creating wetlands for Chivas, which is the largest soccer stadium in Mexico. And you can imagine the volume of urine that gets generated in that environment. And so very big challenge for being able to transform that water. And he was able to do that.
That's amazing.
And then also he worked for Coca-Cola, and he also worked for tequila. It's a high fiber.
All require water.
Lots of sugar. And, you know, when you have these extremes, you have to develop a lot of tools. So he came to us and looked at our unique circumstance and realized that there was an opportunity there with so much domestic sewage that needed to be handled. So anaerobic biodigestion is what our gut does. It's some microbiome of our gut contained in tanks, and this upflow biodigestion that are in these tanks are basically using the same organisms that live in our gut, and they're the original organisms. And I'm going to repeat myself here because I just love them.
Good.
So archaea is the name of those original organisms that are methanogenic. They were the precursors to bacteria, and they were the first life on this planet. Archaea means the ancient ones in Greek.
I love it.
So the archaea do the majority of the work in digesting all of the nutrients that are in domestic sewage. So the three biodigesters, enormous biodigesters that we're using, are doing 85% of the job. And so our microbiome, the microorganisms in the soil and the microorganisms that are helping to turn sewage into clean water. So it's harnessing biology. It's so incredible how the planet has all the regenerative capacity.
It's interesting because we were talking about this a little bit earlier, that a lot of what we're talking about is going back to nature, to natural processes, working with nature instead of against nature. But at the same time, we really are also talking about science. We're talking about natural biology. And I think, sometimes we tend to think it's one or the other, but it really isn't. True biologists, we're talking about biology working with nature's powers, because the answers pretty much always are there, as we discover.
Now it's citizen studies. It's better because the people is most participative and recognize the values of the nature. And it is beautiful because the people made in new form to think about the nature.
Mm-hmm. Right. If we can talk about nature not just as being something quote unquote old fashioned, but actually very innovative, and working with these processes, and we can be much more effective in everything we're doing. And I was interested when you said about the biodigester and the microbiome, that it's like the one in our stomach, but also like the one in the soil, right? We know more, and we're still learning a lot about the microbiome in our digestive system, and we know a tiny fraction about what's in the soil's microbiome, and where those studies are fortunately really going forward. But it's really both of those processes, they're very similar, which is why, of course, similarly, the food that we eat from natural, healthy soil reacts better in our body. I mean, it's sort of like, I'm not a scientist, but it kind of makes sense to me. But actually, what you said about water, salinity, heavy metals, and these is a perfect lead into my friend BJ over here, who has figured out innovative ways to solve pretty much all those problems.
No, I don't know about all the...
I'm counting on this group solving all the problems.
I have to say that all of us on this panel, we're all mimicking nature. That's what it's about. And I want to obviously talk about what I do, but I'm an organic farmer, avocado farmer, and after about 3 years after I bought my farm, somebody wanted to try to sell me some microbes that I could add to my irrigation system to help do exactly what you're saying, create airspace in the soil. And so they came out to my farm and tested my soil, and they go, are you sure you're not using our product already? I go,
No,
I'm not. I'm just I'm just farming in a proper way, because they were used to testing my neighbor's soil. It was dead. There was nothing alive in the soil anymore.
Which is what you get under conventional farming, with pesticides, herbicides, and a lot of chemical inputs. And then you have to put more in.
And on the same note, I put in a septic system on the farm 25-something years ago. All my neighbors, they pumped their septic tanks out. I never had to pump mine out because it's alive. It's doing its job. It's digesting the sewage. So,
Exactly.
people just don't.
Simple solutions. And that's the thing. Like, you're a scientist. We're not anti-science here. Nature isn't anti-science. It is fundamental science. It's the building blocks of it all. Now, we have a follow-up question for you, Sarah, from the audience. How expensive is the water treatment system that you've put in place? In context, how easily could a small community afford one, like Valle de Guadalupe or one of the small towns in the Valle de Guadalupe?
we determined to bring our water up to California Title 22 standards, which added another layer of cost to the project. We also made it beautiful, which
Not strictly necessary, but still amazing.
because I wanted it to inspire people. So we first created a prototype that treats 3 liters of water per second, but we're building a much larger plant that treats 30 liters of water per second. 20 liters will be sewage from the town, and the other 10 will be what is generated at Rancho La Puerta and at the residences at Rancho La Puerta. So as far as cost goes, for that 3 liters per second of water, if you did the biodigesters, the biofilters, and the wetlands, it would probably be about $400,000. But that is producing that amount of water all the time. It never stops. It's a constant flow. And so all those 3 liters per second isn't a huge volume. Well, like 30 liters per second is a massive volume of water. Because it's flowing 24/7, it's a remarkable amount of water. Water costs in Tecate have gone up tremendously. And I do know that both Ensenada and Tijuana experienced severe disruption in water availability in this last year. So I think, the return on investments for these kinds of innovative plants and systems, they really need to be seen over the long term. But we know that they're going to become more and more financially reasonable as every year. As time goes by, water will only become more expensive.
And harder to come by, potable water, even agricultural water. As you said earlier, it's 1% of the water that's available.
Right. But you're solving 2 things. You're creating clean water, but you're also treating the sewage. So it's 2 in 1 kind of thing, where usually cities, those separate units. Yeah,
That's right.
And they really need to be one.
The other 2 components that are important in the system is that the archaea are methanogenic. They create methane gas, and that's biogas. And
We always think of methane as being bad if it goes into the atmosphere, but when you do is capture it, use it as fuel.
It's 28 times worse for the atmosphere than CO2. So capturing methane is really important. And that biogas then we run through a generator and it goes back to the grid. And although the plant requires a couple more months before it's fully up and running, we're expecting that the energy that goes back into the grid will offset the energy to pump that water. So we're expecting this to be net zero. And the only waste product that comes from this is the mineralized sludge at the bottom of the biodigesters, which gets composted with the wetland plants. And so we get compost.
You're regenerating the soil at the same time, which is incredible. Now, one of the things you mentioned before, that one of the limitations on the system you have is a stream variant in alkalinity or in heavy metals, but this is something that you figured out how to address in your system.
Yeah, so we use, as you know, ocean water for desalinate. We desalinate ocean water, not the traditional way, which is done with reverse osmosis system. Rather, we use we mimic nature. Again, we use the sun, creating clouds, and then condense the clouds and make rain. And so the byproduct, of course, that comes out of that is salt and some heavy metals. We do it at low temperatures, so some of the minerals travel into the clouds and are part of the water, which somebody asked me earlier about, how many minerals are in your water? And I said, well, minerals can really only be absorbed by the body if they're organic minerals. And organic minerals you can really only get from plants. And so there can be all the minerals in water you want, but
You're not absorbing.
you're not absorbing them. They need to go through a plant to become absorbable. But anyway, so the salt, we filter that brine. We're 83% roughly efficient in converting ocean water to drinking water, compared to reverse osmosis system that are about 50% efficient. 50% of that water goes back in the ocean usually.
With double salinity, which then affects.
Exactly, a lot more salt, and that creates dead zones in the ocean, impacts, the wildlife, the fish and whatever. And so, because they need oxygen, and basically all that salt kills the oxygen in the ocean. So, but yeah, so we filtered, but we have a ozone chamber that we fill it, a chamber full of ozone, which you can generate out of air. So, and ozone is a gas, we know it, it's out there. And, but then we infuse water into the ozone chamber, which the ozone attaches itself to the heavy metals and pull them out.
Which is fantastic.
So, which is a really nice way. And then we can put the remaining brine in ponds, just like they do in France and all over the world. To the south of here, they have these salt ponds. And as somebody suggested to me the other day, we really should stop making all that salt everywhere. We should just use the salt from desalination plants, and that would be plenty of salt.
And I've used salt. It's very good.
Right, exactly. So there are ways to do it, but I have to say, I'm converting ocean water to drinking water because I wanted to prove that it could be done in a sustainable way.
And an efficient way.
And so, but the amount of rain and moisture that we have that falls on ground, I truly believe if we treated it properly, it would be enough water for all of us. I don't think
if 60% didn't roll on.
Yes, exactly. And we had good soil, and every product we use, every table, every piece of plastic, every shoe, every cell phone that we use all require water to make. And we, certainly north of the border, we're very liberal about just getting new phones and new this and new that and whatever all the time. And we're only thinking water is the thing we drink or maybe water our plants with. But water is used in everything. And so we need to be more conservative. I grew up in a country in Europe, that when we left the room in the house, we turned the light off. It didn't stay on. And when we were done using our water, we turned the water off. You brushed your teeth, you turn it on, and you turn it on and off. So everything was done that way. I think to burn a 60-watt light bulb for, 24 hours uses 4,000 gallons of water. Just because of the generating of the electricity and the cooling down of the turbines and whatever it takes, pumping it, around. It's crazy when we think about it. So just, it comes down to what you're doing over there, educating the kids, because we were educated. We knew to turn the light off. In Denmark, we have not 1 or 2 recycling bins. We have 7 recycling bins because we know what goes in what recycling bin. And I remember one time I was back visiting, and I had an old farm there, and it was around the holidays, and I put the wrong thing in the wrong bin, and the garbage collector had no problem knocking on my door going, "Hey, I'm not picking up your garbage because this is in the wrong bin." So it took, I think, a 6-pack of good beer to finally get him to pick it up. But yeah.
Also made with water.
Also made with water, exactly. It takes water to make a plastic bottle. It takes more water to make a glass bottle. It takes water to do everything. So I think if we really think about it, teach the kids, because a lot of the parents don't know it, but they can teach the parents, make a game out of it. Right. Maybe give them points in school for converting their parents to turn off the lights and doing things like that.
You said it exactly right, because I think actually the funny thing is, the older we get, the harder we are to move a little bit on things, and myself included. But when, kids learn about conservation, recycling, limiting use, they're the ones following behind you, turning the lights off. They are the future. They're the ones we can hopefully help to gather information, teach young kids, teach young adults, really how to manage these limited resources for the future. And I want to follow up on what you just said, that you're talking about cleaning water. You're talking about getting water where we need it from the ocean, which is the one water source that's growing instead of shrinking. And there's a problem there. Another good reason to use desal. But I want to go back to what you said about what we really need to learn to do is manage the water that we have naturally. How do we increase that 40% filtration to 80, to 100? What can we do? You two, these are your expertise, I think.
Yeah, well, I think we're going back to mimicking nature. Because if we get our hands off of nature, then nature is going to fix itself. The point with nature is that sometimes the nature's times are not the same as our times. And that's why we need to get involved ourselves in
A longer process.
Exactly. So I think that's important. I think you mentioned that as we increase just 1% of organic matter, we're able to actually infiltrate per hectare 250,000 liters of water.
So 1% increase in the organic matter in the soil has that dramatic a shift in the ability of the soil to absorb and maintain that water. That's amazing.
That's a lot of water.
It's a lot of water.
And let me give you an example. When I joined the ranch, it seemed like my dad had like a present for me, because he said, the average is like 9 inches per year. We got 20 inches on that year. You know what we did? Nothing, because our soils were compacted. Mm-hmm. So in 3-4 months, we're already in drought mode.
Already back where you were before. And that's true for us in both sides of the border here. We had all this rainfall this year, but what do we have to show for it? And that's where you comes in.
Nowadays, with 6 inches, just 6 inches, at the right time, obviously, we can actually go all the year around with the same cattle with no supplementation. So it makes a big difference between 20 inches that we're almost wasted all of them to 6 inches that you actually store. Because the largest storage of water should be the first few inches. Mm-hmm. So sometimes we celebrate when we say, the dams are now full.
Exactly.
Well, I don't know if I should celebrate that. I think the water should be in the soil, not in the dam.
Aha, bravo.
Well, because it's sitting there and it's evaporating, when you go past it.
Sure.
Like Hoover or whatever, it's sitting on it, it's evaporating and it moves through the Colorado River and down from Northern California to Southern California. So sometimes I think the whole global warming and the big picture is hard for people to understand. And kids too, they talk global warming, but do they really understand it? But there are things they can understand on an everyday level. For instance, it drives me crazy when I see people throw vegetables in the garbage can. It absolutely drives me crazy. I'm like, wait a minute, don't you have a composting bin? Everybody should be composting.
Yeah.
I mean, there should be a law that says this cannot go in the garbage. You need to compost in your backyard. And you don't need a lot of room to compost.
No. You don't.
And that compost would improve the soil and help keep the water where we need it and produce better food.
Keep it out of the dump, put it in the soil.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
And I think to both of your point and to your question about like getting more water in the ground, it's like, one fun fact that Brad Lancaster, a water harvester practitioner in Tucson and teacher, the region and globally kind of like moving these things forward, has on his website is more water falls in Tucson as rain in the average year than the average person uses in their home in that same year. So all those resources are here for us to use, right? And so how do we also increase that? It's not just entirely up to us, right, to get all of that water in the ground. That's kind of like why I focus on the communication and making this knowledge more accessible, because collectively, I think this is how we're going to get more water in the ground. Understanding why the the process of composting is so important and vital to, replenishing these nutrients, the health of our soils and our landscape.
Another game I have for you to teach your kids, not your kids, but kids.
The people that work,
the collective.
I don't know how many you have, but when I'm in the city and I see water run down the gutter, I chase it. I chase it all the way back to the source and I turn it off.
Right.
Or I knock on the door and I tell people, what are you doing? And maybe it's a game for the kids. How many faucets did you turn off this week?
Right. Or did you turn on that water?
Yeah,
Where do you think it's coming from?
Right.
But another thing that we like to talk about is like the same water that we're using now, the same water that the dinosaurs were drinking and doing.
We're not creating new water.
Right.
We're simply reusing it, which is an incredible point. This is Natalia Badan, who's with us in the audience, was talking during the break about a bathroom that they put in place at her winery here in the valley, where all of the water, except for the one you use to wash your hand, is simply just going through a system and being reused and reused, because that's what water does. And the sooner we all appreciate that, I mean, it's, what you were saying a minute ago, if we talk about global climate change, and that seems so daunting and it feels like, what can I do? I'm just one person. But if you talk about the steps that conserving water, reusing water, recycling water is one tiny step, or composting, which will improve the soil, which will then keep more water. That every tiny step that each one of us can do in our own space, however small or big it may be. This was the message of the Kiss the Ground film that I found so empowering. Whatever your space of control is, if it's 1 square foot, a yard, or 100 miles, or however many acres you have, a lot, you are impacting your life, your community life. And then, people just want to feel like, I don't think people wake up every day and think, I want to make the decision that's the worst thing for me, my community, the environment. No, people really want to do the right thing. They just need to have the tools or the information and steps, not like it's your job to fix climate change. That's overwhelming. But what can I do in the water sphere? That's what you teach. So tell us some more about what you teach. Yeah. And all three of you are working in an aquifer environment here too. And I think there's some interesting dialogue to have about that.
Yeah, I think it's, again, sort of like investing in that and that local, like starting from like, not getting too overwhelmed with, we need to fix the Colorado rivers, right? The Lake Mead is going down, all these different things. It's like, it starts in your home, it starts in your backyard. We actually have a program at Watershed Management Group called Build Your Own Basin. We provide people with like, the steps to build a basin, look at your landscapes, or like come up with the calculations and stuff like that. So they can sort of like estimate, like, I have a ponding issue there. It's like, is that an opportunity to put the water back into the ground now? And so we sort of like make it so that people can start looking and start small and simple, and then learn from that, and then start expanding, getting their neighbors involved. And at the end of the day, yes, we want to get the water back into the ground, and that's the goal. But it's also, it's not about the rain garden necessarily. It's about like people learning about the possibilities, right? How we can work together and what's under our control to be able to, this thing that's very important to us, to be able to do that and not depend on other maybe slower process hierarchies, procedures that maybe don't, sort of like react in a timely manner or are set up for communities to be able to benefit from them in that same period. So
yeah, we also need to teach our kids about wanting organic food, because then we encourage organic farming, and then get away from those big industry farms that spray pesticides everywhere and herbicides and whatever.
And it's funny that they've been back to organic farming and how like your soil was alive. It's like, it's funny how that's thought of as an alternative.
Yeah,
it's not really like the way to go. And it's like, you're doing all these things.
Because I don't know what the percentage is of organic food sales these days, but it used to be 7-8% or something. It's very small. That basically means that 92% of the population don't give a crap about what they eat, and that's bad. It should be the other way around. But if the kids,
maybe not that they don't give a crap, but maybe that they need to understand why it matters to their health, to their community, to water, the soil, the climate. If the connection is made for people, I choose to believe that people want to do the right thing. Right. They just don't always have good information, because the information and sort of from the more corporate, standard, conventional is big and powerful and constant. And we're here to provide sort of a more balanced presentation of the world.
Yeah, I think people are worried about their daily survival before doing these things, streamlining. And so that might not be at the forefront of their minds. And so I think as scientists, as organizers, as people pushing this dialogue forward, it's up to us to maybe the question is how do we integrate it in people's minds. So I think that's how I see my task. Yeah, looking at that as a priority and as a wonderful resource.
I mean, your place in Tecate is a perfect example of how people are hungry to eat better and live a better life. There's no processed food, I'm sure, at your place. So
it's just food.
That's right. It's just food, real food.
And we harvest for our guests for the kitchens 3 times a week. So they're always eating something that was in the ground that morning or just the previous morning.
And something I've read or heard before about your farm, not only are you providing that produce for the guests at the ranch who are obviously there because they're focused on health and wellness, but you also provide food to hospitals in the community, schools, and so forth. I mean, I think that's part of it. We have to make sure that what we're talking about, gets to the largest audience imaginable. Your point I thought you were about to make, which is, people struggle. They're busy. They're working 2 jobs. Food is expensive, and organic food is more expensive. And those of us on the, who are working for systemic change, it's our job to try to level that playing field so that the subsidies aren't so disproportionate toward bad food, but rather make good food more available and accessible and affordable. But at the same time, we try to move that needle. We also want to explain and educate, why does it matter? What's the difference for my health, my microbiome, my community, the environment? And one of those will resonate with someone. Go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, why is it worth our time, right? Why is it worth our time to invest in tending to your garden and putting these systems in and observing? I think that's kind of it is worth your time.
The principles also need to change the switch, because the people think only in the problem. And in this case, in this study, to think in solution.
Not just problems, but solutions.
Yeah, because the people think all the problems, and don't think very well.
Well, that's human nature, right? We get overwhelmed with the problems that we're facing in our life. And so we're a little bit in crisis mode, and we have to get out of crisis mode before we can move forward. And as you said, a lot of these solutions are not immediate. It's not like, boom, I'm going to change this, the world is fixed tomorrow. These are solutions that have a very long arc, and you have to sort of think forward. But we also have to be at the point where we're able to do that. Yeah.
I think the beauty of what we do is that every year you're improving.
Uh-huh.
Every year is better. It's not like, okay, it's going to take me 5 years to get to... Yeah, but every year you do it, you're getting better food. You're getting more wildlife. You're getting more life in general. I mean, like Gabe Brown said in his book, he says, I used to wake up every day to see what I need to kill. Now I wake up every day how to promote life.
Uh-huh.
And that's kind of changed everything. Some people, like consumers, ask me, how do I know if the farmer is doing a good job? Well, it's not rocket science. Use all your senses. Does it smell good? Does it taste good? I mean, we haven't really lost the ability to sense the food. Remember that food still is the terroir of the microbiology. So
we might not know those terms, but we can taste it.
Yeah. Does it look good?
Uh-huh.
Does it have life on it? I mean, if you use all your senses, you know that what you're getting is something good for you and for your health.
But when I see a new subdivision going in, what's the first thing that pops up? Or 2, 3, 4 fast food places, where you could cook at home. I mean, you talk about economics, and certainly organic food is a little bit more maybe, although prices have come down. But instead of building 4 fast food places, if you put in a little organic store or a garden or whatever, exactly, community garden, it's common in Europe. You live in an apartment, but you can rent a little space or provided by the community. And you can cook at home a lot cheaper than you can go out and eat processed food.
Even with just very simple indicators like, do you hear the birds on those fields? Mm-hmm. How many insects do you see? See, I got Gabe Brown visiting our ranch.
Wait, tell everybody who Gabe Brown is.
Okay, see. Gabe Brown, I would say Gabe Brown is one of the most famous farmers. He wrote a book. He's From Dirt to Soil book. It's been the book with the most books sold the last 4 years on farming.
Yeah.
And he went to visit my ranch in Chihuahua, and he said, Alex, because, well, I'm Alex in Mexico, but I'm Alejandro here. Alex, I had never seen so many insects in all the states of every state in the U.S.
Uh-huh.
So we have a big problem of the decline of insects worldwide. And it's because the use of so many chemicals we're using.
And that has a huge impact on everything that we're talking about.
It's the foundation. I mean, we talk about the microbiology, microhealth, as we call it. But the insects is the foundation of a lot of things. Every time you kill a pest, which is not a pest because maybe the plant is weak, you're killing another 700 insects.
Uh-huh.
Benefit insects.
Right, and healthier plants are sort of stronger and capable of resisting those insects or pests on their own without resorting to the herbicides and pesticides.
Yes.
So, tell me some more about what you're doing that you haven't talked about.
Well, I was just thinking of what Sara shared in terms of like, drinking from the river and like that not being like available to us anymore. And I don't know why that was making me think of like the way that I think of like what we practice, right? I feel like as environmental, whatever we want to call it, we're introducing these concepts that to me have been taken away from us. How to work the land, how to read the land, how to put a plant in the ground, how to look after a plant. And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that, a lot of the stuff that I do in terms of, green infrastructure, water harvesting, industrial resource conservation, we've put those names to these practices that people that have lived here, indigenous, communities that have lived here for thousands of years.
Old practice.
Right, exactly. And so, like, I think that's something that's very important to call it the work that we do to really honor those practices and the people that, learn to live in these lands, in the semi-arid region, whatever we want to call this region of the world, before us, before urbanization, industrialization, modern times, whatever we want to call it. I think I think that's one of the other things that I like to communicate when we're talking about that is, being stewards of the land. We're respecting the land. We're forming a relationship with them. So,
And we have a lot to learn.
Yeah.
Indigenous cultures in that regard, across the globe, truly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
When you live in a way that everything is your relations and everything is alive and everything is interconnected and everything is intelligent, then you know that when you are applying pesticides and you're killing the insects, you're killing the songbirds. And we've lost these. Then the bees that pollinate the crops. But that's one of the big challenges looking ahead is all of our farming is dependent on bees for pollination.
100%.
So my fellow avocado farmers, my neighbors, when I first bought my farm, they were all slathering their trees with brown, who knows what it was, with helicopters. It was like Vietnam kind of coming in low and spraying brown stuff on all the trees, getting rid of the mites or whatever, thrips or whatever it was. And I said, well, I'm not going there, so I'm going to start putting beneficial insects out on my farm. So we would get beneficial insects from insectaries and attach the lacewing larvae to each tree. We'd go around each tree, we'd get lacewing larvae cards, and the lacewing larvae would crawl up on the fruit and eat the thrips and whatever. And so we did it for years. And after a while, we really didn't have to do it anymore because they were there, and we would plant native plants where they could overwinter when there were no avocados on the trees. And the only places I really had problems were always on the border of where my non-organic neighbors were. I don't know if they were all jumping.
No man's land.
They were all jumping over on my side because they knew the helicopters were coming. But they knew in the center of the ranch. I mean, far a ways away from the borders, there was a perfect balance of everything, and we had no pest problems. And to this day, still have after 25 years, no pest problems, and they're still over there helicoptering.
Claudia, we have a question for you. Somebody wants to hear about the water system that you're working on with Club de Tres Cantos that you mentioned a little bit earlier. Can you tell us about that system?
Yes, excuse me. This system is a wetland, artificial wetland. We use for the captación de agua, capture water for the rain. And in this year is very, very beautiful because the rain is extraordinary. And
this was a good year to do it.
It is a good example because need to more the side spot captation for water because all the water is to lost. In this case, there are a lot of reservoirs, but this is not ecological reservoirs.
Right.
And in this case, it's ecological reservoir because have a technology for filter the water or into the
ground
The ground
where it's needed.
is needed too.
It's interesting. I also sit on the board of UC Press, which is the publishing house for the University of California system. But they, of course, have published quite a bit on water. And I remember reading early on that, one of the ways in which California truly failed is that, we largely get our water from the Colorado River. And so early on, we dismantled a lot of capture and transport systems that began or could have been continued in favor of the notion that we have all the water we need from the Colorado. Why do we need to worry about it? And it's that attitude, which is unfortunate. Like we're paying for it now, but we have the opportunity to fix that. But when you can truly capture the water, I mean, I think about in my own space this year with this rainfall that we've had, of course, my garden is happy and green, but what did I do with all that water? I live near the ocean, and there are 2 canyons on either side of me that are formed completely by water running off into the ocean. And on these heavy rain days, these last 3 months, it just looks like rivers going right out to the ocean. This is potable water. This was someone's drinking water. This was irrigation water. Then I think, how come we're not capturing that and bringing it back before it joins the ocean and needs your process to be reutilized by us? We have to get outside the box. And I love what everyone here is talking about in ways that you're doing that. And especially here in the Valle, in your system, is tell us about cost, because we talked about yours. Yours was obviously the creme de la creme system, and maybe your system could also be replicated for less money. But what about the system that you put in there at the winery? Is this system expensive? Could it be replicated elsewhere in the Valle or beyond?
Sí, no, it's horrible. Yes, this is expensive, but it's effective.
Well, I mean, and there's some amount of investment. Obviously, does each individual home or business have to do this? No, not necessarily, but in the collective realm, within a single community, within a collection like an organization like Provino, this is the kind of organization that can work collectively to bring this kinds of resources to more of the members and the community members where they're operating. I think this is impressive.
This is important because in this part of the Mexico, all the water depends the subterranean.
Exactly, all of the water, right? Because everyone here is operating on well water for the most part.
No, there are no rivers. There are no superficial
and very little rain, even less than we have.
Even the water.
What is the rainfall here in Ensenada Valle? 2 drops, did I hear? 2 drops. That's what it feels like.
No, what I live, no,
not enough.
More.
Okay, yeah, the same. San Diego, 11 inch, which is not dissimilar from what you were talking. You said 9 is yours, and now you've got more. Now you've got 20. So we need to do what you're doing.
No, there are more in Chihuahua.
Well, we got 9, because Chihuahua has like 3 regions. Something I would like to add into this conversation is sometimes we as ranchers, farmers think about, oh, great that my neighbor is not doing this because I'm getting all the water from a neighbor. But that is not sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
I think we are within an ecosystem, we are within a community, and we need to share. This is not working in a corporation that, oh my God, it's only me. This should be a public knowledge. Because, for example, my ranch will not be sustainable if I don't help my neighbors.
Yes.
It becomes a disaster when it rains a lot, and then I have like over a meter of water, 3-4 feet coming from my neighbors, and making a lot of destruction. So we always have the open door for them to come over. I mean, they're going to change at their own time. But at least I have 2 neighbors that already are making these practices. So we're making the area bigger, and then that will be eventually a flourishing community.
And that's an interesting point, too, that it's not just you doing it, but your neighbor. And as that space that's engaging in the practices you're talking about grows, that impact on the rainfall and the water capture is exponentially larger. It's not like 1 + 1 + 1 = 3, but much greater. Yeah?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's the bottom line. And also, we work very close with a lot of nature conservation organizations.
Yes.
And they actually, I mean, one of the beautiful things that we have seen is the increase of wildlife, all kind of wildlife. We work very close with the migratory bird conservations. And obviously, if the birds come to my ranch, it will be much easier for them to go to the next ranch.
Exactly. They don't have a dead zone in between in which they're at risk, which is true. Birds,
I don't want to be an island of grass and nowhere.
Right in the middle of.
yes, of course.
One of the things that we found at Rancho La Puerta is that during the summer, it's 10 degrees cooler at Rancho La Puerta than it is in Tecate. And we've been planting trees for years, and we're now focused on a 10-year program to plant trees in Tecate. But that makes an enormous difference. It makes an enormous difference to the individual who is sitting under the shade of the tree, but it makes an enormous difference to the evapotranspiration to generate clouds, to create rain.
Even the mist. We're seeing at our ranch, which is in the Chihuahua Desert, some mist, more days with mist, and also mushrooms now.
Another great, another one of the ancient,
Oh, yeah, mushrooms.
which you can watch our panel on mushrooms, also on UCTV, small plug. I think that really is the energy that we're talking about. It's not just one person doing this, but it creates the example. But as that community grows and grows, that impact is so extraordinary. And you mentioned the temperature shift, and you talked about that earlier, that the temperature at your farm at 10:30 in the morning was 10 degrees cooler than your neighbors.
I'm talking about the area. I think I'm about 5 degrees in hot summers, 5 degrees lower than some of the neighboring properties. I mean, it creates like a whole ecosystem, like a whole area of, it creates its own ecosystem, like temperatures and water and green and all that.
This is what I like about these kinds of conversations, because we never know what thing is going to resonate with anyone in the audience, digital or otherwise, but there's something in your life, well, everything in your life is directly impacted by water, but something hopefully that you hear from this group of people gathered here today will make you think, what change can I make? What small change? I'm going to butcher this quote, but we know the quote that says a journey of 10,000 miles begins with a single step. That's it. If everybody makes one step, just one step, whether it's turning off the lights, whether it's reusing, recycling, capturing, and then how that can affect the entire community around us. The water we're drinking, will it be cleaner? Will we have to treat it less? Will there be more rainfall? Will the temperatures be cooler? All of these things are hugely beneficial. And we started at the beginning. I mentioned my friend Yolanda, who's doing our simultaneous translation, and she works in the crisis of migration. And one of the things that's happening, and we all understand this, in addition to everything we've talked about, is that migration of humans around the planet is affected by climate change and lack of access to water and extreme temperatures. So everybody benefits. If more people are stable in their own environment, everybody benefits. And so there's so many reasons for all of us to truly stay focused on this important issue that, as you said, covers everything that we do.
Yeah, focused and like also open to, innovative approaches. Like I think I was talking to somebody earlier about gray water and the potential to like use that, from your washing machine, from your bathtub, like all that water, like you can be feeding trees instead of like going down the drain, for example. And I wanted to mention, to your point, I think in your previous presentation, you mentioned how it rains more now, where you are because you've introduced and you're calling, right? Like doing all of this, the lower temperatures.
Yeah.
Anecdotally, what I see, like in really hot cities, like cities that don't have a lot of kind of big carbon, clouds will go around it. They just like the donut effect. They
It's amazing, really. I mean, it's amazing what's going on up there, like the flows or the clouds. And we usually talk about having something to cover the soil, a living plant or leader or something. But if you see that the first shield we have is the clouds.
Yeah.
I mean, and in a very dry, degraded places, there will not be clouds. We can feel it when it's hot and when you get a cloudy day. Oh my God, it's so cool.
Can it be more powerful to say that we can, in fact, make rain, we can affect our environment, we can improve it for everyone? And on that really high note, I'm going to close the panel, but open it up now. Thank you. So if anybody has a question for any of the panelists, I see Natalia Badan, front and center. Okay, fire away.
The use of gaviones in the dry rivers, dry when it doesn't rain. Have you seen differences that last for years? Can you tell us a little bit about it? I'm very, very curious.
Yeah, no. So, I mean, I think, amongst us practitioners, we might have different opinions as to implementing gabions, right, as a restoration measure. But I've seen really good examples in Sonora, particularly, of these structures being implemented. And I've seen structures that are 1 year, 5 years, 10, 20 years long. And they're doing their work.
Explain what that means, because not everyone knows, maybe.
Yeah. And so, what these gabions are doing, gabions are essentially kind of like a bunch of rocks put into boxes, wire boxes.
I see. We've all seen them.
Yeah, to put them you put them strategically at a stream, at a riverside where there's a lot of erosion, head cuts, the energy of the water kind of carving into the ground. And so you put those in there to try to slow, spread, and sink the water in an effort to extend the floodplain, right? So the area where all of the water is going back into the ground. And like I mentioned, what I've seen and what I've, we as practitioners have different opinions on that, about what we're putting into the ground and stuff like that, where we're sourcing the rock from. But I see really good recruitment of native plants, extending the floodplain, particularly in the San Pedro, where I've seen it most, reintroducing the cottonwoods appearing again. Cottonwoods and willows and trees like that. And yes, Cuenca Los Ojos is a really good example, particularly Rancho, San Bernardino, which is the one that I'm talking about.
Right.
Really good people doing really good work out there. And it's amazing to see what they've done in terms of regenerative agriculture, cattle raising, these different approaches. But I feel like Alejandro would also be a great person.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with the area. I'm actually sitting on the board of these guys that have been able to actually get the creeks to be perennial creeks when there was really no water anymore. The only limitation that I see on the gabions is that usually the gabions work pretty well on riparian areas. Mm-hmm. But we need actually the act of the livestock to cover the whole area, because you see very beautiful where the water used to be. Beautiful where you say with these woody plants and these grasses, and we were actually the ones recommending Cuenca Los Ojos to add a livestock. And many people have this idea of livestock is pretty destructive. It is indeed if you don't have control or if you don't mimic the migration of animals. But when you have control over livestock, it's actually a great tool to put biology where we're lacking the biology.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. I'd like to mention another important relative, which is the beaver.
See.
And the beavers in the landscape, especially in California, created massive wetlands and ways in which infiltration of water and tremendous habitat diversity would occur. So one of the things we can do is imitate the beaver. We put gabions into an area that flooded about 20 years ago at our farm, and they've done really well. And the difference between a gabion structure and a dam is that the gabion structure holds back the sediment, and it reduces the erosive force of the water and allows the water to still flow through, but without generating more erosion if they're done properly. And they've been great. We have very, very stable slopes, and we were able to recover some of the damage that the flood did. And the flood only happened because there was a nick point, because there was a big tree and a big boulder and a lot of brush jammed up against it, and then we had a flood behind it. But since we did the natural infrastructure work in the channel and around the channel, it's been beautiful. At Rancho Tres Estrellas, at my organic farm.
I'm gonna advocate for beavers a little bit more. They really are a keystone species, and they really are the ones they're doing, the work that gabions are doing right now. If there were more in our rivers, they would be doing all of this work for us and providing pools of water for deer to drink out of, and all these different things. So yes, gabions, but also beavers even better.
¿Al cuánto tiempo de haber empezado con este manejo de ganado, empezaron a aparecer pastos nativos? Es decir, yo supongo que primero fueron anuales, pero lo que lo que se pretende es tener pastos nativos que duren todo el año, ¿no es así?
Sí, así es. El objetivo es tener diversidad de pastos perennes. Porque aunque nos llueve 3 meses, pero podemos guardar el agua, capturar el agua y guardarla, entonces esos pastos perennes que pasaron después otros 10 meses sin agua, van a retoñar verde. O sea, el verde es muy importante tanto para la microbiología, para el microrrebaño, como para nuestro rebaño. Porque pónganse a pensar en un momento, el sur de México, el 80% del alimento que se hace, que se le da al ganado, viene de fuera del rancho, de la finca. Entonces, es un efecto tremendo el que tiene el ganado mal manejado en todo el ecosistema. Porque entonces empezamos a abrir más tierras y más tierras porque estamos degradando las que tenemos. Sí. Entonces, el enfoque que tenemos nosotros es, y lo aprendimos a golpes y porrazos, como decimos.
A prueba y error.
A prueba y error. ¿Por qué? Porque cuando empezamos con este manejo, empezamos a dividir el rancho sin considerar realmente absolutamente nada. Nada más decimos, nuestro peor enemigo es el área grande, hay que dividirla. Pero hay un problema con ese enfoque. Porque ese enfoque no considera las mejores áreas y las peores áreas, y aparte deja los potreros demasiado grandes, no hay el impacto animal que necesitamos. Ahora nuestro enfoque es muy distinto, nuestro enfoque es, dime dónde están tus mejores lugares. Y eso aplica en todo, ¿eh? Dime, por ejemplo, estamos trabajando ahorita con agaveros en Jalisco, no empieces en el peor lugar, es contra la naturaleza, empieza en el mejor lugar. Entonces nos vamos con los ganaderos. Los ganaderos y los agricultores somos gente práctica. Necesitamos ver resultados. Y no en otro rancho, ahí en nuestra finca, en nuestra propiedad. Al enfocar nuestras inversiones, al enfocar nuestro esfuerzo en tiempo y dinero en la mejor área, vas a tener resultados en la siguiente temporada. Entonces, esa es la idea, que empieces a una pequeña escala. Por ejemplo, en nuestro caso en la ganadería, con intensificar, y luego muchas veces, y lo he visto mucho en California, bueno, en muchos lados, pero en California, para hacer un ejemplo cerquitas, la gente hace un excelente trabajo de pastoreo, pero regresa muy rápido. Entonces, acuérdense, aquí la clave de todo es la diversidad. Entonces, si tú regresas muy rápido, estás trabajando para 2 o 3 pastos, zacates, pero los otros le estás dando en la torre. Entonces, nosotros tenemos un descanso de 1 año, es el contexto. Yo creo que ustedes también están en el mismo contexto. Deberíamos de tener para nuestros animales descansos de 1 año, 1 año y medio. ¿Por qué? Porque estamos trabajando para 3, 4 especies de pastos. Necesitamos tener 100 especies de pastos perennes.
This is the rational grazing. And you said, follow the cows. They know.
Independientemente de trabajar en el rancho, escucho que están trabajando con agaveros. La pregunta ¿es como, digamos, en sociedad o es como también hacen consultorías? Lo pregunto porque en el Delta del Río Colorado se está buscando proyectos que combinen la ganadería, silvicultura, etcétera, para eficiencia de agua. Entonces pregunto por si, ¿cómo operan con los agaveros? ¿Es sociedad o es consultoría?
Bueno, en el caso de los agaveros es consultoría. Es consultoría. De hecho, esta persona, que yo creo que es de las pocas que está haciendo algo diferente en Jalisco, él se educó primero, que lo hemos estado diciendo aquí, primero es la educación, ¿verdad? O sea, se dio cuenta que hay otras formas. Entonces, uno de los principios de la agricultura regenerativa o agropecuaria, como quieran llamar, es el contexto. Entonces, no va a ser el mismo contexto acá porque las lluvias son diferentes, por esto, por lo otro. Entonces, se ve el contexto y se aplican los principios regenerativos, en este caso en el agave. Por ejemplo, en Chihuahua está interesante también porque el sotol es una bebida nativa de allá, y los que estén trabajando con la ganadería regenerativa y tienen sotol, pues ya estamos, o sea, no necesitamos, hay mucha, vamos haciendo las plantas completamente dependientes cuando el suelo está débil. Entonces, ahorita como el agave, quizá hay un problema y creo que lo mencionamos, cuando llueve mucho la gente no se mueve. Cuando suben los precios es terrible para la regeneración, porque caemos en la zona de confort. Entonces, el agave ahorita está dando mucho dinero. ¿Y que hay cambios? Pues no hay cambios porque yo sigo sacando dinero. ¿Por qué voy a arriesgar? Nosotros tenemos que en nuestras fincas, nuestras propiedades, como un laboratorio. Y no hacer una prueba en una prueba en el año, porque los resultados son anuales. En su contexto, en mi contexto, son anuales. O sea, hay que hacer más pruebas, aunque sea a pequeña escala, y quédate con lo que trabaja. Pues no sé si contesté tu pregunta.
Sí, yo quería hacer también una pregunta a ti, Alex. Por lo que haces, tal vez tú tienes más información, ¿no? Cada vez, sabemos que cada vez aumenta la superficie para la agroindustria y que gran parte de lo que se produce en esos monocultivos es pastura. Y luego la venden por todo el mundo y contaminan mientras la cultivan y cuando la transportan y todo, ¿no? Casi que tengo la respuesta, pero tengo una esperanza en que sea diferente. Hay empresas de estas gigantes, que además estamos hablando de 5 o 6 nombres de empresas que manejan la producción mundial de alimentos, ¿no? Que un porcentaje muy grande de las tierras que se cultivan pues son para esto, para pastura. ¿Alguna de estas está probando algo diferente? Porque son el gran, es el muro, ¿no?
Sí, no, mira, bueno, sí, la respuesta es sí.
Muy bien.
Sí hay. La cuestión es que el ganadero y el agricultor somos muy lentos en cambiar. Entonces, a veces nos hemos visto muy frustrados en cambiar. Sí hay gente, ¿verdad? O sea, y vamos a hacer un poquito el contexto y la realidad. Estamos en una finca, en un rancho. Hacemos todos. Oye, este salió muy inteligente y mándalo a la ciudad. No, necesitamos la gente inteligente en el campo. Porque nadie puede vivir, el doctor, el abogado, necesitan comer todos los días.
Sí.
Y lo que estamos comiendo es muy pobre porque nuestros suelos son muy pobres. Entonces, el enfoque ahora es, ¿cómo podemos? Bueno, ya el agricultor y el ganadero es poco el cambio, hay cambio, pero hay poco. ¿Cómo podemos enfocarnos en el consumidor? Porque tú puedes decir, bueno, ¿y a mí qué me importa como consumidor? Porque a ti te debe importar la densidad nutricional de los alimentos. O sea, si no hay suelos fértiles, no hay densidad nutricional. O sea, ya olvídense son todos los componentes terciarios que de hecho le dan el sabor. Por eso los alimentos no tienen casi sabor, porque no hay vida en el suelo. Y las corporaciones que ya le están viendo un beneficio económico porque le van a decir al consumidor, si yo tengo este proceso regenerativo, yo estoy mejorando, tienes que mejorar el suelo y a ti te va a ir mejor en la salud. Entonces sí tenemos empresas grandes que son las que han estado, de hecho, inyectando millones de dólares a la agricultura regenerativa. Que esperemos que no se distorsione el nombre o no se abuse del nombre, ¿verdad? Pero sí hay esperanza.
Yo quisiera compartir un ejemplo también. La cervecería en Tecate antes echaba todo su desperdicio al río y apestaba, era mucho nutriente lo que desgastaban hace muchos años. Pues como hace 20 años empezaron a cambiar ese proceso y desde que entregó Heineken, todo ese material va para ganado. Y es el principio que no hay desperdicio en la naturaleza, que estos círculos tienen que ser círculos virtuosos en donde todos los nutrientes se utilizan. También lograron en la planta, en la fábrica de Heineken, disminuir el uso del agua para producir cerveza. Es la producción de cerveza en donde más ahorran agua en el mundo ahorita. Entonces, cuando hay esa necesidad, sí hay maneras. Y cuando uno de los grandes problemas que sucedió en el mundo fue cuando se separó el cría de animal del cría de las plantas.
Total.
Y la fertilidad del animal se sacó y se tuvo que reemplazar con químicos. Entonces, otra vez es tratar de juntar. To find, and from a wine perspective, to find the right pairings, right? Ajá. Lo que va bien junto, hay que mantenerlo junto.
Y mire, quiero agregar algo. En una ocasión estábamos en la India y yo siempre estoy promoviendo esto. Estábamos en una convención de la ONU y me acerqué a la delegación alemana. Y me dijeron que, no, pues si gustas te doy una presentación. No queremos saber nada, porque 1 kilo de carne requiere tantos litros de agua. es cuando fallamos en el pensamiento holístico. En nuestra propiedad, si aumentamos de las 2 pulgadas, que es el suelo degradado por hora de infiltrar, a 18 pulgadas, nuestra finca, nuestra propiedad tiene capacidad de captar agua en un año para satisfacer todas las demandas de agua de una población de 100,000 gentes. Entonces hay que verlo siempre holístico, ¿verdad? O sea, qué es lo que estamos haciendo y cómo beneficiamos todo el ecosistema.
Bruno, ¿preguntas? ¿Sí o no? Sí.
Bueno, quería tocar un tema que nos ha tocado mucho y tiene que ver con los baños secos. Es para Sara y para Luis. Quería saber si ustedes están en procesos de aplicar ese sistema, si están educando gente y pues que hablen un poquito del tema de baños secos porque creo que es un gran tema que es súper importante en cuanto al agua, ¿no?
Pues en Parque del Profesor, donde Fundación tiene todos sus programas educativos, tenemos baños secos. Y en Rancho 3 Estrellas tengo algunos baños secos también. Yo creo que algo que es muy importante es cambiar ese chip que tenemos del asco o de porque no huelen, son limpios, es una maravilla. Y luego usamos los orines, se tienen que diluir con agua, pero esos orines diluidos con agua son un excelente fertilizante. Y sí, es un desperdicio tremendo. I once saw a cartoon where there's an African child looking at a Western older man saying, "You do what in your water?"
Yeah, sí.
¿Por qué? Porque es agua potable, es agua que se podría estar tomando y cada vez que le bajamos al excusado, cada vez que le bajamos es agua potable que está yendo.
Está potable cada vez.
Se puede tomar esa agua. Y igual nosotros en Tucson, en nuestro sitio demostrativo, se llama Living Lab and Learning Center. Usamos, obviamente, los baños que tenemos ahí son secos. Y es uno de los primeros puntos que hacemos cuando tenemos visitantes. Pues aquí son secos. Hay letreros de cómo usarlos y qué tanto papel, qué tanto serrín, qué tanta agua para diluir. Pero, o sea, creo que es una de las atracciones, ¿no? Es una muy buena manera de la gente también interactuar. Algo de lo que no están muy acostumbrados. Se ven, no, pues esto puedo hacerlo. A mí me encanta dirigir a la gente cuando también hacemos tours en este centro que tenemos demostrativo y les explicamos de dónde va y cómo es que usan el nitrógeno, el potasio y todo esto para que las plantas crezcan y estén felices. De otra manera, pues nomás se esteriliza. Y es ese como el cambio de chip, ¿no? Es el cambio de perspectiva, oportunidades en vez de problemas para utilizar estos desechos que en realidad pueden ser recursos para beneficiarlos.
La misma problema con gray water también.
Yeah.
We need to switch the way we think about recycled water. You know, I grew up in Germany like you, which is a place that rains constantly. It's very green, looks like Portland. Rain, rain, rain all the time. And when I was a little kid, the water was immediately recycled and put back into the system. We only used recycled water in a place that arguably didn't need to, right? You know, so it can be done, and we have sort of this aversion to dry toilets or recycled water, and we have to change the chip, as you said.
I think in Denmark now, when they build new houses, they require that you're digging up streets and stuff. They love to dig up streets to put up in a sewer, and then they close it up, and then they dig it up again so they can put a fiber optic cable in, and then they close it again, then they dig it up again. So,
It's my neighborhood.
next time they dig it up, put 2 pipes into the house. Put one for, potentially gray water and one for sewage. If you don't want to collect it and capture it in your own place, but in apartments, for instance, you could treat the water separately and differently and recapture that water.
De hecho, en el último trabajo que hicimos en el Valle de Guadalupe, para nosotros fue bien sorprendente ver que muchos de los establecimientos sí están poniendo baño seco o baños en donde el agua se recicla, ¿no? Lo comentaba hace rato Natalia, en el caso de Deckman, sí. El reciclado del agua es absoluto en el baño, pero también hay baños secos en donde cuando uno llega dice, esto es un vergel. ¿Por qué es un vergel? Porque se está aprovechando todo lo que sale del baño seco para mantener las plantas, se está reciclando el agua de las cocinas para regarlas Y entonces uno dice, ¿por qué hay tantas plantas aquí? Sí, fue algo que, por eso, porque se está usando, como decía, todo dentro del mismo rancho sin sacarlo, ¿no? Entonces es bien importante. Y se ven, digo, sí, nosotros sí, para nosotros cuando estuvimos haciendo esto, establecimos por ahí un indicador sobre la sustentabilidad de los restaurantes, porque de hecho el número de restaurantes en los últimos 10 años ha aumentado a un 600%. Entonces hay capacidad o no para mantenerlos, y parte de lo que descubrimos fue esto, ¿no? De que a lo mejor es la necesidad lo que hace que se tengan que aplicar estas prácticas, pero a través de la necesidad se va aprendiendo y se va haciendo cada vez las cosas de una manera más adecuada a las condiciones en las que estás viviendo, ¿no? Pero sí es cierto, las experiencias hay que compartirlas, porque si no, no se sabe qué está sucediendo, ¿no?
Y es lo bueno de hacerlo en comunidad, con grupos de gente, no solamente tú como individual, pues porque si no, entonces te cae la responsabilidad a ti de hacer todo esto. Y
Tienes razón.
de nuevo, la educación en el aspecto comunitario y hacer esto en colaboración, en vez de uno solo.
¿Hay otra pregunta para ella?
Sí. Pues más que pregunta, es una anécdota que les quiero compartir que me parece interesante reflexión. Hace algunos años tuve la oportunidad de promover huertos de traspatio en comunidades rurales en Sonora. Entonces, pues llegué, sobre todo estábamos buscando pequeñas clínicas, ¿no? Que tuvieran alguna barda porque los perros y las vacas se metían. Entonces tenía que ser lugares con ciertas características, y había lugares ideales que estaban en primarias y en secundarias de pequeñas comunidades aisladas y rurales. Y entonces me pareció bien interesante cómo llegaba y les decía, pues les explicaba el proyecto y de qué va. Y me decían, es que no tenemos agua. Y yo, pero ¿cómo? Pues ahí tienes un rotoplas enorme arriba de tus baños. No, pero es que eso es para el agua del baño. Digo, pues es que no, o sea, vamos a meter letrina. Y entonces agarraba yo mi baño seco y mira que el baño seco, y le sacaba el manual de la CONAFOR que tienen ahí, que sí funcionan maravillosamente. Pero es este cambio de paradigma, ¿no? Es este chip.
Sí.
Y la gente decía, es que no puedo sembrar alimentos que me van a ayudar económicamente a mi salud. De verdad estoy hablando de gente sumamente marginada, que no tenía ni para comer. Pero es que el agua es para el baño, porque como que no hay manera de que yo pueda poner un baño seco en una primaria dando un ejemplo indigno. Y el otro comentario, estuve trabajando en alguna fundación hace ya años, y el mero director de la fundación, pues yo traía, ¿no?, mi chip diciéndole que vamos a meter el baño seco, y me decía, no, es que esa es una manera indigna de promover a la gente. Y bueno, pues a mí me iba así como condorito para atrás. Es este paradigma, yo creo, en lo que hay que trabajar también.
Totalmente.
Excelente.
Y tocaste un punto bien importante. En ese cambio de paradigma vienen las autoridades, los gobiernos, de los que no hemos hablado ahorita, pero que creo que es importante por lo que acabas de mencionar. Por ejemplo, igual una anécdota. Para el Valle de Guadalupe, el poblado del Porvenir, mucho se ha hablado de que los poblados del valle necesitan verse y también recibir los beneficios que se tienen en todo el valle. Entonces se hizo todo un proceso para hacer unas calles con este enfoque de infraestructura verde, con pavimentos permeables, con jardines de lluvia, especies que fueran o que se regaran directamente por la brisa y por lo que fuera. No hubo manera de que las autoridades municipales autorizaran el proyecto. Los árboles se tuvieron que poner dentro de una unidad deportiva porque ya se tenían los árboles, pero el problema fue romper no solamente el paradigma desde el punto de vista personal o de la comunidad, sino el modelo que se sigue y que está dentro de los esquemas institucionales. Entonces, esa parte yo creo que
Es más complicado.
Tiene también que trabajarse, es más complicado porque como somos un país tan diverso en términos de México, y creo que pues también en Estados Unidos se da esta diversificación, pues no podemos, las políticas públicas son generales y en realidad cada localidad, cada región debería de poder tener estas excepciones adecuadas a las condiciones. Y esa parte es muy complicada y hay que trabajar.
No, y tiene usted razón, porque nosotros cuando trabajamos en los ranchos, en las fincas, cada rancho tiene que tener su propio enfoque, porque muchas veces hemos sido educados para seguir fórmulas.
Sí, claro.
Y las fórmulas no trabajan porque está el contexto. Oye, es que dame una fórmula, es que no te puedo una fórmula. Por eso decimos el racional, porque espérame, es que tenemos que pensar, tienes que pensar qué hacer en tu contexto, tanto económico como social, como natural, ¿no?
Bueno, y a mí se me hace como trabajar de nuevo a trabajar de arriba para abajo, ¿no? De abajo para arriba. También queda mucho nosotros informar a las políticas o dar esa influencia a las políticas públicas que se desarrollan. Por ejemplo, de nuevo los baños secos, el diseño que nosotros tenemos y le comunicamos a la gente ha sido aprobado por el Departamento de Calidad Ambiental de Arizona. Así que ya se los proveemos y les decimos, esto ya pasó por ese nivel. Entonces se puede hacer, claro, está este proceso, está aprobado, pero luego se tiene que trabajar en el proceso, o sea, para que te aprueben diseño y que tú lo puedas poner y que no haya ningún problema, ¿no? Pero en eso también es lo que estamos trabajando. Y creo que hay otras cosillas también siento que son que con un nuevo desarrollo de edificios, casas y así, se le tiene que poner Grey Water Stubouts, no sé cómo se dice en español, pero para que puedan producir agua gris y irse al paisaje. Entonces sí hay maneras de trabajar, pero pues si las ciencias son complicadas, la política aún más. Sí, es lo que estoy descubriendo yo.
Otra pregunta para él.
¿Qué tal? Buenas tardes. No, pues muchísimas gracias y felicidades por todos sus proyectos, la verdad son súper inspiradores. Y sí, justamente nosotros tenemos el mismo clima de California y pues yo creo que la historia también, la cultura tiene que ver mucho. Aquí en Ensenada, en 1940, había 4,000 personas aquí en el municipio, ¿no? Entonces apenas estamos empezando a hacer estas políticas y empezar a hacer esos proyectos que realmente sí permeen en un futuro. Pero bueno, yo también tengo muchas preguntas, así como Natalia, pero bueno, me voy a enfocar en dos nada más, que son dos problemáticas que puedo ver, ¿no? Por ejemplo, aquí tenemos a su compañero Gabriel y se están haciendo unos muestreos de la playa de Ensenada, pues la gente, creo que ya todo el mundo sabe que tenemos la playa Moscantonera de México. Y ya tenemos los muestreos en la UABC también. Aquí la maestra no va a dejar mentir, ya se tiene todo un archivo de años, ¿no? De cómo ha cambiado la calidad del agua. Pero lamentablemente la comisión de agua, que es el manejo del agua que se hace en el estado es por municipio, o debería ser por municipio. Entonces tenemos estas comisiones que son estatales, que verdaderamente no arreglan el problema como debe ser. Entonces sacamos a la mesa la otra vez de cómo podríamos demandar, o ustedes en su trayectoria, cómo podemos demandar de una manera mejor internacional, porque como el agua de aquí llega también a Estados Unidos y la de Estados Unidos llega para acá, verdaderamente compartimos ese mar. Pero como no hay un freno y no hay una política o un grupo organizado que tenga que tener una política seria, ¿no? De que verdaderamente estas personas no están cumpliendo con sus funciones. Entonces, esa es mi primera pregunta. ¿Ustedes qué comentario, qué hazaña o qué manejo se podría hacer de una manera internacional o en equipo para poder ir a demandar estas comisiones y tener mínimo esos muestreos que estén al alcance de todos? Y mi otra pregunta, también Mexicali, en el Valle de Mexicali hay un problema con los trigueros, con la gente que vende trigo. Están en protesta hace como 2-3 meses porque no les compran el trigo al precio que debe de ser. O sea, se los compran en 6,000 pesos, mientras que debería ser como en 10,000, 8,000 mínimo para tener una rentabilidad. Pero no sé qué proyecto, qué manejo, qué consejo le darían ustedes a todos estos trigueros y a todos estos agricultores en el Valle de Mexicali, que ellos riegan por inundación. Nada de swales, ni manejo integral, ni nada. O sea, ellos dicen en Estados Unidos riegan de una manera con láser, inundan toda la parcela, y en Mexicali todo el mundo sabe que tiene 50 grados de temperatura y ellos piensan que es la mejor manera porque lleva mucho tiempo, y como estas comisiones de agua no les hacen un manejo, no les ponen una restricción, pues ellos siguen tirando el agua, ¿no? Entonces esa sería mi segunda pregunta. ¿Qué consejo le podrían dar a los agricultores de Mexicali que nada más siembran trigo y alfalfa? Y también tienen mucha ganadería, pero la tienen de toda mal manejada. Entonces, si me pueden contestar esas dos preguntas de qué consejo le dan a los trigueros y qué manejo internacional o qué estrategia podemos utilizar para poder tener una mejor calidad de las plantas de tratamiento que tenemos en el municipio. Gracias.
Yo creo que a la primera pregunta, creo que puede expandir un poco. Creo que aún se necesita mucho que aprender, o sea, hay mucho que aprender sobre cómo se manejan, ¿no? Las aguas. Es muy diferente dentro de estados, entre municipios, y luego también empieza a considerar cómo se maneja en Estados Unidos, ¿no? Y cómo se miden diferentes cosas. Así que de lo que yo he aprendido ahorita mucho tiene que ver la armonización de datos y el intercambio de sabiduría para saber qué es lo que ha pasado, qué es lo que está pasando, qué es lo que va a pasar, para poder empujar ese diálogo, ¿no? De manejo. Creo que ahorita todavía es muy delicado en el aspecto de decir, vamos a manejar esta cuenca, este río de esta manera, porque son dos diferentes países, dos diferentes estados, 15 municipios que todos están participando, y no solo el gobierno, pero también la academia, y las ONGs y otros de esfuerzos que a lo mejor no están en sinergia. Entonces, no solamente el hecho de que se necesita aprender más sobre qué es lo que está pasando, pero también llegar a ese nivel de sinergia donde se puede hacer un impacto más claro, ¿no? Para poder avanzar ese diálogo de manejo de aguas y cuencas, ríos. Es lo que he aprendido, porque es lo que me interesa a mí en lo que he estado trabajando ahora con el cuenca del río San Pedro y de Santa Cruz, cómo interactúan ambos nodales, cómo interactúa Agua Prieta con Naco, cómo interactúan estas regiones, pues, y cuáles son los intereses, cuáles son las industrias. Entonces es algo muy complicado, pero sí es muy interesante.
Sí, mira, y la segunda pregunta, en Chihuahua bueno, hay todo tipo de cultivos, pero uno de los cultivos más fuertes es el nogal, o sea, la nuez pecanera. Y ahí tenemos 2-3 ejemplos con agricultura regenerativa, en donde se siembra unas 15 especies distintas, o se trabaja sobre lo que ya estaba nativo, y se meten las borregas. Y esa gente está ahorrando el 50% del agua. Obviamente no inundan, porque fíjate, los excesos causan más problema, igual que nosotros. Oye, es que necesito tomar esta vitamina y la tomas en exceso y es un problema, que no es tan simple como, es que nomás tomo esta vitamina, ¿no? El exceso de agua mata también mucha microbiología. Entonces yo te garantizo que ese tipo de riesgos, ¿por qué están preocupados de querer? O sea, obviamente el sistema no trabaja, porque siempre que paga los platos rotos es el productor, y ahí está todos los brokers o los coyotes, ¿no? Pero realmente, por ejemplo, en una ganadería regenerativa o una agricultura regenerativa, nosotros no estamos preocupados por los precios, porque lo que mata más al agricultor son los insumos, o sea, lo sintético. Y entonces, si tú tienes un monocultivo, estás expuesto a las plagas, que no tienes diversidad, ¿verdad? Y luego si estás inundando ahí, y aparte, imagínate los cambios de temperatura, inundas y luego no tienes nada entre los surcos, y luego en las altas temperaturas, te está matando toda la microbiología. Y si no tienes microbiología, tienes una planta débil, y si tienes una planta débil,
Tienes un producto.
tienes que traer de fuera para poderla. O sea, por eso le llamamos a veces a ese tipo de cultivo hidroponía extensiva. Sí, porque en el suelo nomás lo está deteniendo para que no se caiga, y se caen como quiera. Entonces, ahí mi recomendación es, mira, es difícil cambiar a los productores, y ya les dije, nosotros el enfoque que hemos tenido en Chihuahua es, ok, estamos enfrente de 100 personas, ya detectamos y este.
El que quieren.
Que ellos tienen hambre, y bueno, yo no quiero discriminar aquí a nadie, pero muchos son los jóvenes y las mujeres las que están liderando esto. Entonces, y vamos a pedir la gracia de Dios para que el papá lo deje hacer algo, porque muchos de los padres estamos obstaculizando el avance. No, es que así lo hizo yo, mi abuelo. Sí, pero tu abuelo agarró una tierra fértil. Tú estás agarrando polvo. O sea, y estás con una planta completamente pendiente de todo. Entonces, aquí la cuestión es aplicar los principios de agricultura regenerativa, y muchas veces la gente piensa, pues es que no producen lo mismo. ¿Cómo vamos a alimentar el mundo? Eso es, dirían los americanos, bullcrap.
Bueno, con esto, entonces vamos a terminar esta discusión. Gracias a todos ustedes y un aplauso por todos los expertos que tenemos acá.